Hi, this is Patrick. In this video I'm going to show you how to basically create a banner image in Photoshop for a web page that you are developing in Dreamweaver. So I'm going to open Photoshop CC, and I must apologize from the get-go. I have been using Fireworks for over 10 years now, and so as basically Adobe making the decision not to keep updating it means that it's time to move on, and so I am adjusting to that. But basically, Fireworks was a combination of Photoshop and Illustrator, and so it was not near as powerful, and it's still available under the Creative Cloud, the CS6 version. And while it's not as powerful as Photoshop or Illustrator, it's a nice mix of the two. And so I find that it still is an adjustment when my brain after 10 years wants to do things a certain way. But basically what I want to do is show you how to in Photoshop, and I'm really focusing on Photoshop. You could do this in Illustrator, but Photoshop is a great photo editing tool. It's the industry leading tool. So I'm going to start in Photoshop for this. Now, you can always start by going online and looking. I'm going to basically go to Google Images, and I can Google banner images, and there are lots of ones out there that I can start with. In this example, I'm going to show you how to use an image that I took myself, but a lot of times you can start with other images. And while there are debates on at what point when you take a few different images and you mash it up, do you create something new or not? For as long as it's for education, especially if you're going to drastically change an image, I think you're pretty safe. But with that said, I always like to start with looking for images that are already tagged for Creative Commons that are basically saying that I can reuse. Now, we're not going to get into this video on all the different intricacies of copyright and fair use in Creative Commons, but all you need to know right now is that it's really good to start by either with Google Images or let's make sure with Google Images or with Creative Commons. You can also search for Flickr. All of these sites, there is a way to search for things that you have rights to use. So if I go to Google Images and if I type in mountain, I can go to search tools and I can go to usage rights and labeled for reuse, and you can read through each of these. And so you'll find that sometimes that great one that you wanted is no longer available, but that's okay. So then for banner, you usually want, if you want something to go across the screen, you want a large image. If you're going to just use something as a smaller part, you can filter it that way. Much the same way here with search.creative commons, I can type in mountain, and in this case I could choose what I want to search. I'm going to search Flickr, and then I'm making from my search restricted to things that I can modify. And so it's wasn't changing color, but it is searching Flickr. So I was noticing that the website was being a little strange. But the basic idea is then you would find an image. Let's say that I want to use the squirrel image. I can click View Image, and then I can download my image. And it's always a good idea to get the URL and in your code or somewhere on your page to give attribution. So we're not going to really get into attribution right now. And this is a really big image. And so while I mentioned that it's good to start with a big image, there is such a thing as too big of an image. But with that said, I'm going to right click and I'm going to save as. And I'm going to save this to my desktop. So I'm going to jump into Photoshop now and just start to play. So when I come to Photoshop, this layout, I tend to start with new. So I'm going to click new and I'm going to go with custom. And this is where I'm going to decide right away the dimensions of what I want. And so I'm going to create a banner for a page that's 960, and I can play with the height some. These are some dimensions I might use. Resolution, I can definitely keep 72. Basically, the traditional idea is that if it's something, an image for the web, 72 is definitely all you need. If it's something that you wanted like to print a photo of your family, you'd want to do 300. And so those are kind of the two ends that you want to focus on. Then background, I'm going to go with transparent, and I'm going to say mountain banner image. Okay, so now it's already set this up for me, and it's already set up like this, where this is the dimensions I want. So you'll notice over here that you have your basic tools over here. Just like with Dreamweaver, you have your panels or windows, if you will, over here, and so you can select these and they will show up. You can do all kinds of things to adjust your screen. For me, the main things are to know that I'm going to use mostly these tools on the left, and when I click on one of them, so if I click on the crop, this up here adjusts no matter what I do. And that some of these, if I click down on if it's got a little triangle, there's other options. And so with that in mind, I'm going to go to Place Embed, and I'm going to bring in this image of a mountain that I already have. And so it's already on my desktop, and so I'm going to bring this in. Okay. So I'm just going to use my arrow key, or I can hold shift down and I can drag it across. Let's say I want it here. And this is something that, I could adjust this. And this is something I could, make my whole banner could be right like that. Or I could play with seeing where I want this on my page. Alright, so I'm going to hold shift down, and that keeps it from moving. So I could focus on something like that. And the traditional principle with photography, at least, is they talk about the rule of thirds. And if you Google that, you can, get a better idea of it. But it's this basic idea, and I don't know if Robin Williams actually talks about it. My bet is she does in her book. But that things are more interesting on those when you think of a rule of thirds, right? So when you think of this tic-tac-toe board, if you will, these intersections is where it's more interesting too. So rather than have this lighthouse right in the center, it's more interesting to visually to focus on that rule of thirds and those axes. So at this point, I'm looking at this image. It looks pretty good. I can click on text. Actually, it first wants to say, what do I want to do with this image? And I want to place it. And so I could have hit enter return and it would have kept it. Now I'm going to click on text, and up here I can adjust the font, the size, the color. So from the beginning, I'm going to start with, maybe we'll try something like this. Let's see if we can. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click. Make sure I click on this layer. And if you don't see anything over here, keep in mind that you can always go to Window. I should be able. Move this where I want. And you always want to think about contrast. And there are definitely ways that you could add, let's say, a box right here. And you could, there are ways you can play with the transparency if you want to adjust that. So with it selected, I'm going to go to Layer. I'm going to go to Range. I'm going to say Bring to Front. So then I can bring it over. And this isn't the best color scheme, but you get the idea. And right now, I can adjust that where I want it. And I'm going to go ahead and save. Now, when I save it, what it's doing is it's saving the Photoshop file. The Photoshop file is great to keep because I can come back later and I could maybe work on making this semi-transparent background. I can play with this color some more. I can do lots of things. And so it's important to save this Photoshop file. And so right now I'm just going to save it. I'm going to save it in my desktop because that's where I'm working right now. But then if I want to actually use it in Dreamweaver, I have to actually, or for the web, because not everyone has Photoshop, so they won't be able to use it, I'm going to go to Export As, And for the web, I tend to like to use a PNG file, a PNG file. Other common ones would be a JPEG or a GIF. JPEG tends to be what you use if you're doing like a photo of a person. A GIF might be something if it's just more geometric shapes, but what I like is, especially if you want to use a transparent background, it's really important to have a ping. So I'm going to notice how it has transparency. I'm going to say export all, and I'm going to export it. Okay, so right now you'll notice that there's my PSD file and there is my image file. So I'm going to take my image file, or my ping file that is, and I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go into my websites folder, into my images folder, which I actually don't have on this computer. And I'm going to copy that there. Alright, so we're going to do one more example. So don't need to save it, I already did. So I'm going to create a new one. And in this type, let's do the same idea, but we'll go with maybe a much bigger size. We'll go with transparent background. So at this point, I might not be sure I want to do transparent background, so I could maybe add this. I'm just going to add basically a shape, and it's going to add this nice layer, and I could play with the color scheme to find something I like. Now jumping over here, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to, rather than go to the file, place, embed it, I'm just going to drag it from my desktop over, and it does that again. And what it wants me to do is hit enter return to place it, and I did. Okay, let's undo that. So I'm going to click this. Notice when I click on it, it gives me the ability to, I'm going to hold shift down. And so this is just a different type of banner image. So rather than the image being everything, this is another way. And so you want to think about how this fills the page. So it could be that I like that. So I'm going to, let's place it. I'm going to crop it so I have the same amount of white space roughly above and below. Okay. And then I'm going to, and you could play with doing, lots of different things with shapes. I'm going to hold the shift down, and then I'm going to add some more text here. But in this case, I definitely don't want to use this color, so we'll go with that. Hopefully there's enough contrast. It's not great, but EDTECH 502. Okay, so I'm going to add another thing of text. I'm going to make it a little smaller. Make the color a little darker. I'm going to go straight across here. The idea basically is that you just can play around with shape and size. And you could always go back and change with font and color, do whatever you want. Right now I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to export it. So this time I'm going to export it as a JPEG. And so if I go to a JPEG, you can notice that I can playing with the quality size. So, this is basically going to adjust the total file size. And these things become important later when, if you find your images are loading slow, it's important to really think about this. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and save this in my web folder in my images folder. Okay. So now that I have those two, I'm going to jump into Dreamweaver, and I just mocked up a page here real quick. I have actually the CSS on the page rather than a separate style sheet. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to get rid of this in my header. I'm going to go to Insert Image, and I'm going to go into my images folder. I'm going to do the first one that I created. Now, in this page I created is 960 wide if you look at my container, and so it fits perfectly here. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to preview it. Okay, that's what it looks like. I definitely, some of the color scheme's not great, but you get the idea. And I'm still getting used to Photoshop myself. But, I definitely would want to sit here and give my banner image some alt text. So something like that. But I can also go back to this and I could just delete it. I could decide, I want to go with this bigger, different effect. Once again, and I'm going to save this. And I'm going to preview it. And that's what it looks like. So this was a real quick example of how to create a really basic banner image or two using Photoshop. I hope this helps. I'm going to try to follow this up with a more detailed video coming soon. Thank you.